Here's a little something for your trouble.
Arthur, don't do this. Does Julian send his regards?
Have you ever seen a man's soul shatter in a single second? It didn't happen with a gun, and it didn't happen with a scream. It happened with a name. Harrison Blackwood was the kind of man who thought the world was his vending machine, until the night he threw a handful of change at a trembling waitress. He thought he was buying her humiliation. He didn't know he was paying for his own destruction. When she looked up, she didn't cry. She just whispered one word. A word that had been buried in a grave for 5 years. And suddenly, the billionaire wasn't the one in power anymore. The rain in Seattle didn't wash things clean. It just made the grime slicker. Inside the Obsidian, however, the weather was irrelevant. This was a place where a steak cost more than a Honda Civic's monthly payment, and the air smelled of aged leather and indifference. Harrison Blackwood sat at the center table, the power table, as the staff called it. Harrison was 52, though his plastic surgeon and personal trainer had bullied his body into passing for 40. He made his fortune in aggressive acquisitions, buying family-owned companies, stripping them for parts, and selling the skeletons. He was a man who knew the price of everything and the value of absolutely nothing. Tonight, he was entertaining 2 junior partners from a rival firm. He was in a foul mood. The merger with the Asian tech giant was stalling, and Harrison hated waiting. "This wine tastes like vinegar," Harrison announced, his voice carrying just loud enough to silence the nearby tables. He slammed the crystal glass down. Emily Carter flinched. She was 26, but the dark circles under her eyes and the roughness of her hands made her look older. She had been on her feet for 10 hours. Her uniform was a size too big, hanging off a frame that had grown too thin from skipping meals to ensure her 4-year-old son, Liam, had fresh fruit and new shoes. I'm terribly sorry, Mr. Blackwood," Emily stammered, rushing forward. "It's the 15 Cabernet you ordered. I can decant another bottle immediately." "Don't bother," Harrison sneered, waving a hand as if swatting away a fly. "Just get out of my sight. You're hovering. It's depressing." The junior partners chuckled nervously. They were sharks in training, eager to mimic the great white. Emily retreated to the shadows near the kitchen door, her cheeks burning. She needed this job. The tips at the Obsidian were the only thing keeping the eviction notice from becoming a reality. She took a deep breath, smoothing her apron. For Liam, she told herself. Just get through the night for Liam. 20 minutes later, the bill arrived. It was $4,200. Harrison barely glanced at it. He tossed a heavy black credit card onto the tray. When Emily returned with the receipt, Harrison was laughing at a joke one of the partners had made about peasant housing. Emily placed the leather folder on the table gently. "Thank you, Mr. Blackwood. Have a wonderful evening." Harrison stopped laughing. He looked at Emily, really looked at her, for the first time. He saw the frayed hem of her sleeve. He saw the cheap plastic watch on her wrist. He saw vulnerability. And because he was a man who felt big only when making others feel small, he smiled a shark's smile. "Service was adequate," Harrison said, his voice dripping with false generosity. "But you look like you need help, sweetheart. You look like you're starving." "I'm fine, sir," Emily said, her voice tight. No, I insist on a tip." Harrison reached into his pocket. He didn't pull out a wad of cash. He pulled out a handful of loose change, heavy silver dollars, quarters, nickels. He had them because he hated carrying change. He usually gave it to the valet to be demeaning. He held his hand over the pristine white tablecloth, directly above the edge where Emily stood. "Catch," he whispered. He opened his hand. He didn't drop them on the table. He threw them. Clatter, ping, thud. The coins hit Emily's chest, bouncing off her apron and scattering onto the hardwood floor with a cacophony that sounded like a gunshot in the hushed restaurant. The entire dining room froze. The silence was absolute. "Whoops," Harrison smirked, leaning back in his chair. "Looks like you have to work for it. Pick it up. It's probably more than you make in a week." One of the junior partners gasped, looking away in embarrassment. The other just stared at his drink. Emily stood frozen. The humiliation was a physical blow, a hot iron pressing against her chest. She could feel the eyes of everyone in the room, the pity, the shock, the amusement. Her instinct was to run, to scream, to throw the tray at his expensive suit. But she couldn't. She had rent. She had Liam. Slowly, painfully, Emily sank to her knees. The floor was cold against her knees. Emily began to pick up the coins. Her fingers trembled as she grasped a silver dollar that had rolled near Harrison's polished Italian leather shoe. Harrison watched her, taking a sip of his water, looking like a king watching a jester. "Make sure you get the pennies," he mocked. "Every cent counts in your world, doesn't it?" Emily collected the last quarter. She held the cold metal in her palm. It felt heavy, like lead. She stood up. The room was still deadly silent. The manager was rushing over from the front desk, looking terrified, but he was too far away to stop what happened next. Emily didn't put the money in her pocket. She didn't throw it back at him. She walked to the table and very gently, with a dignity that seemed to make her grow 3 inches taller, placed the stack of coins on the white tablecloth next to his wine glass. She looked Harrison Blackwood directly in the eyes. Her eyes were green, a piercing, familiar shade of moss green that Harrison hadn't seen in years. "I don't need your charity, Mr. Blackwood," she said, her voice shaking but clear, "and neither does your grandson." Harrison's smile didn't just fade, it evaporated. He blinked, confused. "Excuse me?" Emily leaned in closer, so only he could hear the next words. "Toby always said you used money like a weapon. He told me you'd rather burn a dollar bill than give it to someone who needed it. I didn't believe him. I told him his father couldn't be that heartless." She pushed the stack of coins toward him with one finger. "I was wrong. You're exactly the monster Toby ran away from." Toby. The name hit Harrison like a physical slap. The air left his lungs, his face went ashen, the blood draining away so fast he looked like a wax figure. "Toby," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Tobias?" Tobias Blackwood, his only son. The boy who had wanted to be a painter, not a CEO. The boy Harrison had given an ultimatum 5 years ago. Give up your foolish art and join the firm, or get out and never come back. Tobias had left. Harrison had cut off his cards, his trust fund, everything. He had waited for the boy to come crawling back. But Tobias never did. 3 years ago, Harrison had received a police report. A car accident in Oregon. Fatal. Tobias Blackwood was dead. Harrison had grieved in a closed room with a bottle of scotch and never spoke his name again. You knew Tobias?" Harrison stood up, his chair screeching against the floor. He ignored the stunned looks of his business partners. "I was his wife," Emily said softly. "And the starving boy you just insulted? That's his son. Your blood." She turned around and walked away. Harrison stood there, his hand hovering over the coins. His heart was hammering a frantic rhythm against his ribs. "Grandson? Wife? Wait!" Harrison shouted, a sound of desperation that didn't belong in the obsidian. "Wait!" He scrambled out of the booth, knocking over his wine glass. The red liquid stained the white cloth like fresh blood. He ran toward the kitchen doors, ignoring the manager, ignoring the stairs. He burst into the kitchen. It was a chaos of shouting chefs and clanging pans. "Where is she?" Harrison roared. "The waitress, the one with the green eyes." A terrified sous chef pointed toward the back exit. "She just clocked out, sir. She ran out the back." Harrison sprinted through the kitchen, slipping on a grease spot, regaining his balance, and bursting out into the rainy alleyway. It was empty. Just the rain, the dumpster, and the distant tail lights of a bus fading into the Seattle mist. Harrison Blackwood, a man who controlled billions of dollars, stood in the garbage-strewn alley, soaked to the bone, realizing he was the poorest man on earth. The next morning, Harrison didn't go to the office. The merger with the Asian tech giant could rot for all he cared. He sat in his penthouse, overlooking the Space Needle, but the blinds were drawn. On his desk lay a private investigator's report from 3 years ago. The one about Tobias's death. He had read it only once. It was brief. Subject deceased at scene. No next of kin listed on contact forms. He had assumed Tobias died alone. He had assumed Tobias died hating him. "Get me Pendergast," Harrison barked into his phone. James Pendergast was his head of security, a man who could find a needle in a haystack if you paid him enough. Pendergast arrived within 20 minutes. "I need you to find a woman," Harrison said, not looking up from the picture of Tobias he kept face down in his drawer. He flipped it over. A young man with messy hair and those same moss-green eyes smiled back. "Name?" Pendergast asked, taking out a notepad. "Emily. She works, or worked, at the Obsidian. She has a son, a 4-year-old. Harrison swallowed hard. "The boy is my grandson." Pendergast, a man of stone-cold demeanor, raised an eyebrow. "I didn't know Tobias had a child, sir." "Neither did I," Harrison whispered. "Find her. Today." By 2:11 p.m., Pendergast was back. He looked uncomfortable. "What is it?" Harrison demanded. "Where does she live?" "Sir, you're not going to like this." Pendergast slid a file across the mahogany desk. "Emily Carter. She legally changed her name to Carter after Tobias died to avoid the press finding out she was a Blackwood. She wanted to protect the boy." Harrison opened the file. There was a photo of Emily, looking tired, holding a toddler. "The boy..." Harrison put a hand over his mouth. The boy was a carbon copy of Tobias at that age. The same unruly hair, the same chin. "Where are they?" Harrison asked. "They live in the Narrows," Pendergast said quietly. "It's a low-income housing project in South Seattle. Apartment 4B. Sir, she has 3 jobs. She works at the restaurant, cleans offices in the morning, and does laundry on weekends. She is drowning in debt. Mostly medical." "Medical?" Harrison looked up sharply. "The boy, Liam. He has severe asthma. They've been in and out of the ER. She's paying it off dollar by dollar." Harrison felt a wave of nausea. Last night, he had thrown quarters at a woman who was working herself to the bone to save his own grandson's life. He had mocked her for needing money while he sat on a throne of gold. "The car," Harrison said, standing up. "Bring the car around." "Sir, if you go down there in the Rolls-Royce, you'll get robbed," Pendergast warned. "I don't care. Bring the car." The drive to the Narrows took 40 minutes, transitioning from the glass towers of downtown to the broken pavement and graffiti-stained walls of the south side. Harrison sat in the back, gripping the door handle. He remembered the last conversation he had with Tobias. "You care more about your legacy than your family, Dad," Tobias had screamed. "My legacy is this family," Harrison had shouted back. "Without this money, you are nothing." "Then I'd rather be nothing," Tobias had said, slamming the door. Harrison closed his eyes. "I made him nothing," he thought. And now his son is living in squalor. The car pulled up to a crumbling brick building. The windows were barred. A siren wailed in the distance. "Stay here," Harrison told Pendergast. "Sir, I should accompany you." "No, I need to do this alone." Harrison stepped out. His Italian suit stuck out like a neon sign. He walked up the cracked concrete steps to the entrance. The buzzer for 4B was missing the plastic cover. He pressed the exposed metal button. Psst! Who is it? A voice crackled. It was her. Emily, Harrison said, his voice trembling. It's Harrison. Silence. Long, heavy silence. Go away, she said. Please, I just want to see him. I just want to see Liam. You lost that right 5 years ago, she replied. Emily, please. I know about the debts. I know about the asthma. I can help. Help? She laughed, a bitter, sharp sound. You think you can just write a check and fix this? Tobias died in a rust bucket car because we couldn't afford to fix the brakes. He was driving to an art gallery to sell a painting to buy a crib. He died trying to provide for us because his father decided to play God. Harrison felt his knees buckle. He grabbed the doorframe for support. Tobias hadn't just died in an accident. He had died because he was poor, because Harrison had cut him off. I didn't know, Harrison sobbed, tears finally spilling onto his silk tie. I didn't know. Go home to your mansion, Mr. Blackwood, Emily said. Your money is no good here. The line clicked dead. Harrison stood in the rain, staring at the peeling paint of the door. He couldn't leave. He wouldn't leave. He sat down on the wet steps of the apartment building, a billionaire in the dirt, and waited. The rain in Seattle is relentless, but Harrison Blackwood was more stubborn. By 3 a.m., his $5,000 Italian suit was a heavy, sodden ruin. The temperature had dropped to 40 degrees. His teeth chattered with a violence that rattled his jaw, but he didn't move from the concrete steps of the apartment building. Pendergast sat in the black SUV parked at the curb, the engine idling to keep the heat on. Every hour, the security chief would roll down the window. Sir, please. You're going to get hypothermia. Let me take you to a hotel. We can come back in the morning. No, Harrison croaked, his voice barely a rasp. If I leave, she'll think I'm just like before. Fair weather. Temporary. Sir, with all due respect, you look like a vagrant. Good, Harrison muttered. That's better than what I was. He sat there as the sun began to rise, painting the grey sky with bruises of purple and orange. His joints screamed in protest as he tried to shift his weight. He was a man accustomed to orthopedic office chairs and Egyptian cotton sheets. This concrete was a torture rack. At 7:15 a.m., the heavy metal door creaked open. Harrison scrambled to stand, his legs nearly giving out. He wiped the rain from his face with a trembling hand. Emily stepped out, holding Liam's hand. She was wearing a worn yellow raincoat and carrying a backpack that looked like it had been patched with duct tape. Liam was bundled up in a puffy blue jacket that was slightly too small for him. His wrists were exposed to the cold air. Emily stopped dead when she saw him. Her eyes widened, scanning the shivering, soaked wreck of a man standing in her path. His grey hair was plastered to his skull. His lips were blue. You're still here, she said, not as a question, but as an accusation. I told you, Harrison shivered violently. I'm not leaving. Liam peeked out from behind his mother's legs. He had big, curious eyes. Tobias's eyes. He looked at Harrison with none of the judgment the rest of the world held. Mommy, Liam piped up, his voice high and sweet. Is that the sad man? Harrison's heart broke and reformed in the span of a second. The sad man. Liam, don't look at him, Emily said, tightening her grip on the boy's hand. She tried to step around Harrison. Emily, wait, Harrison pleaded, reaching into his wet jacket. He pulled out a check. He had written it inside the car before getting out the previous day. It was damp, but the ink was still legible. I know you don't want me, but take this. For the debts, for the asthma medicine. Please, it's $100,000. Just take it. Emily stopped. She looked at the check in his shaking hand. $100,000. It was freedom. It was a new car. It was a college fund. It was safety. She looked at the check, then up at Harrison's desperate face. You still don't get it, she said quietly. She took the check from his hand. Harrison let out a breath of relief. Thank you. I just want to... Rip! Emily tore the check in half, then in quarters. She let the wet scraps of paper fall into the puddle at their feet. Tobias didn't die because we lacked money, Harrison, she said, her voice hard as flint. He died because he lost hope. He reached out to you 3 times before that accident. Did you know that? He called your office. Your secretary told him you were unavailable indefinitely. He just wanted to hear his father's voice. He wanted to know he still had a dad. She stepped closer, invading his personal space. You can't pay for the years you stole. If you want to help Liam, you don't do it with a checkbook. You do it by being a human being. But I don't think you know how to do that anymore. She walked past him, pulling Liam along. Harrison stood frozen, staring at the shredded check in the mud. He felt a tug on his pant leg. He looked down. Liam had pulled away from his mother's grip for a split second. The boy reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, crinkled package. A fruit snack gummy pack. You look hungry, Liam whispered. He shoved the gummies into Harrison's freezing hand. Liam, come on, Emily called out, panic in her voice. Liam ran back to his mother. They disappeared down the sidewalk toward the bus stop. Harrison Blackwood, the man who had acquired 3 corporations in the last quarter alone, stood in the slums of Seattle holding a packet of fruit snacks, like it was the Holy Grail. He fell to his knees, not from the cold, but from the weight of a child's kindness crashing against his own cruelty. He didn't eat the snacks. He put them in his breast pocket, right over his heart. Pendergast, Harrison whispered into the air. The SUV rolled up. Pendergast jumped out and threw a blanket over Harrison's shoulders. Hospital, sir. Now, you're going into shock. No, Harrison said, his teeth chattering. Take me to a hardware store, and then take me to a grocery store. Sir. I have to fix the sink, Harrison muttered, his eyes feverish. She said the landlord wouldn't fix the sink. Harrison spent 3 days in the hospital with pneumonia. He had almost killed himself on that stoop. But the moment the IVs were out, he was back in the back seat of the black SUV. But this time, he wasn't wearing a suit. He was wearing jeans, stiff, uncomfortable denim that cost $40 at a department store, and a flannel shirt. He felt ridiculous, like he was wearing a costume, but Pendergast insisted. If you wear the Armani, you're the billionaire, Pendergast had said. If you wear the flannel, you're just a grandfather. They parked a block away from the Narrows. It was Saturday. Emily would be doing laundry. Harrison walked to the building. He didn't buzz the intercom. He sat on the steps and waited. He wasn't there to beg this time. He had a toolbox, a brand new red metal toolbox, sitting beside him. When Emily walked out with a basket of laundry balanced on her hip, she nearly tripped over him. "Oh my God," she hissed. "Are you stalking us? I will call the police, Harrison, I swear." Harrison stood up. He looked healthier than before, though pale. "I'm not here to talk to you," he said calmly. "And I'm not here to give you money." "Then why are you here?" "I heard you telling Mrs. Higgins in 4C that your kitchen sink was leaking and causing mold," Harrison said, "and that the landlord, Mr. Gorski, said if you complained again, he'd evict you." Emily's face flushed. "You have been spying on me." "I have ears," Harrison said. "I'm handy. I used to fix cars before I Before I made my first million. Let me fix the sink. No charge. No strings. I fix it. I leave. Emily looked at him with suspicion, but she also looked at the dark circles under her eyes. The leak had been keeping her up at night, the drip, drip, drip echoing in the small apartment. Why? She asked. Because Tobias hated leaky faucets, Harrison said softly. Used to drive him crazy when he was doing his homework. The mention of Tobias's quirk made Emily's shoulders drop. It was a small, intimate detail, a shared memory. 10 minutes, she said. If you say one word about money or custody or my parenting, you're out. Harrison nodded. Deal. He followed her up the stairs. The hallway smelled of boiled cabbage and stale cigarettes. Apartment 4B was tiny. It was a studio apartment divided by hanging sheets, but it was clean, impeccably clean, and everywhere there was color. Harrison's breath hitched. The walls were covered in sketches, charcoal, pencil, watercolor. They were everywhere. He never stopped, Emily said, noticing Harrison staring at the walls as he set his toolbox down. Even when we couldn't afford canvas, he painted on cardboard. He painted on newspapers. Harrison walked over to the kitchen area. It was cramped. He knelt under the sink. It was a rusted pea trap, corroded and nasty. I need a bucket, Harrison said, rolling up his flannel sleeves. For the next hour, the billionaire was on his back on a linoleum floor, wrestling with rusted metal. Grease smeared his face. He scraped his knuckles. He cursed under his breath. Liam sat on the floor 3 feet away, watching him with intense fascination. Are you fixing it? Liam asked. Trying to, kid, Harrison grunted, wrenching a bolt loose. Dirty water splashed onto his chest. He didn't flinch. My daddy fixed things, Liam said matter-of-factly. Mummy said he fixed the stars. Harrison paused, the wrench in his hand. Fixed the stars. He painted them, Liam said, when it was cloudy. Harrison felt a lump in his throat. He finished the job, tightening the new seal he had brought. He turned the water on. No leaks. He crawled out from under the sink, wiping his hands on a rag. He stood up, his back aching. It's done, Harrison said. Emily was standing by the stove, making tea. She looked at him, dirty, sweaty, wearing cheap clothes. For the first time, she didn't look at him with hatred. She looked at him with confusion. Thank you, she said stiffly. I should go, Harrison said. He packed his tools. He knew he had to stick to the deal, leave, and maybe, just maybe, earn the right to come back. Wait, Emily said. Harrison froze. Liam wants to show you his room, she said. It's actually the closet, but it's his space. Harrison turned. Liam was beaming. The boy grabbed Harrison's giant, grease-stained hand and pulled him toward a small door near the entrance. Look, Liam squealed. Inside the closet, there was a small mattress on the floor. But the walls were covered in a mural. It was a landscape of a magical forest, vibrant greens and blues, painted with a skill that made the cramped space feel infinite. Daddy painted this for me before I was born, Liam said. Harrison knelt down to look closer. The detail was incredible. Tobias had been a genius. Harrison had told him his art was childish doodles. He had been so wrong. Then Harrison saw it. In the corner of the mural, tucked away behind a painted tree, was a small figure. It was a man in a grey suit, standing alone, looking away from the forest. He looked sad. He was holding a briefcase, but the briefcase was spilling sand. Harrison leaned in, his nose almost touching the wall. There were tiny words painted into the grass beneath the man's feet. For Dad. I hope you find your way out of the desert. Harrison let out a sound that was half sob, half gasp. Tobias hadn't hated him. Even after the eviction, even after the cut-off funds, even after the insults, Tobias had painted him into his son's sanctuary. He had hoped Harrison would find his way out. "He's the grey man," Liam whispered, pointing to the figure. "Mummy says he's lost." Harrison began to weep. Not the polite, silent crying of the aristocracy. He wept with ugly, heaving sobs, clutching his chest. He curled up on the floor of the closet, surrounded by his dead son's love, finally understanding the magnitude of what he had destroyed. Emily stood at the doorway, watching the man she despised unravel. She saw the grease on his face, the shaking of his shoulders. She didn't hug him. She wasn't ready for that. But she walked over and placed a hand on his shoulder. "He loved you, Harrison," she whispered. "That was the tragedy. He loved you, and you loved your money. And now you have all the money and he's gone." Harrison looked up, his face a mask of agony. "I want to trade," he choked out. "I want to trade it all back. Take the company. Take the buildings. Just give me 5 minutes. 5 minutes to tell him I'm sorry." "You can't," Emily said, tears filling her own eyes. "But you can tell Liam." Harrison looked at the boy, who was looking at the crying adult with wide, worried eyes. "Hi, Liam," Harrison whispered, his voice cracking. I'm your grandpa." Liam tilted his head. "The grey man?" "No," Harrison said, wiping his eyes with his dirty sleeve. "Not anymore. I'm going to try to be the colourful man, if you'll let me." Liam smiled. "Okay." It was a start, a fragile, terrifying start, but just as the tension in the room began to break, a heavy pounding on the front door shattered the moment. Bam! 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 "Police! Open up!" Emily's face went white. She grabbed Liam. "What? Why are the police here?" Harrison stood up, instantly shifting from grieving grandfather back to Harrison Blackwood. "Stay behind me," he ordered. He opened the door. 2 uniformed officers stood there, looking stern. Behind them stood a man in a sleek suit holding a clipboard. It wasn't the landlord. It was Victor Sterling, Harrison's chief operating officer, the man who was supposed to be running Blackwood Enterprises while Harrison was sick. "Mr. Blackwood," Sterling said, a oily smile on his face. "Thank God we found you. The board has declared a vote of no confidence. They're claiming you've suffered a mental break." Sterling looked past Harrison into the cramped, poverty-stricken apartment, at the crying waitress and the scared child, and looking at this, Sterling pulled out his phone and snapped a picture before Harrison could stop him. "I think we have all the proof we need. Committing corporate suicide to play house in the slums? You're done, Harrison. We're freezing your assets at noon." Harrison stared at his subordinate. An hour ago, this would have destroyed him. He would have roared. He would have called lawyers. But Harrison felt the fruit snack packet in his pocket. He glanced back at the mural in the closet. He looked at Sterling and smiled. A real smile. "Get off my porch, Victor," Harrison said quietly, "before I buy the bank that holds your mortgage and foreclose on your ego." "You have no power, Harrison," Sterling laughed. "You're done." "I'm just getting started," Harrison said, and slammed the door in his face. He turned back to Emily. "We have a problem," Harrison said. "They're going to freeze my accounts. I can't access my money." Emily looked at him. "So?" "So," Harrison said, looking at the leaky sink he had just fixed. "I currently have $40 in my pocket, and I need to stay here, because if I go out there, they'll put me in a psych ward to secure the vote." He looked at Emily with total vulnerability. "Emily, can I crash on your couch?" The couch smelled of lavender detergent and old dust. It was too short for Harrison's 6-foot frame, forcing the billionaire to sleep in a fetal curl that wreaked havoc on his lower back. Harrison Blackwood woke up at 6 a.m., instinctively reaching for the button to summon his butler. His hand hit a cheap laminate coffee table instead, knocking over a plastic cup of water. He jolted up. He wasn't in the penthouse. He was in apartment 4B, the Narrows. "You're loud," a small voice whispered. Harrison squinted in the dim light. Liam was sitting on the floor, watching him, holding a ragged stuffed bear. "Sorry, kid," Harrison groaned, rubbing his stiff neck. "I'm not used to this." "Mommy's already gone," Liam said. "She has the cleaning job. I go to Mrs. Higgins next door until school. You have to go too." Harrison checked his Rolex, a $40,000 watch that was now his only asset. He couldn't sell it. It was the only thing proving he was Harrison Blackwood and not a homeless drifter. "I can't go out there, Liam," Harrison said, looking at the barred window. "Bad men are looking for me. They want to put me in a timeout." Liam nodded solemnly. "Like when I hit Tommy at school?" "Worse, a padded timeout." Harrison stood up. His stomach growled. He opened the fridge. It was a depressing landscape. Half a carton of milk, a jar of generic peanut butter, and a loaf of bread that was dangerously close to its expiration date. "Is this it?" Harrison muttered. "How do you people survive?" "We dip the bread in the milk," Liam offered. "It makes it soft." Harrison felt a sting of shame. He closed the fridge. "Liam, do you trust me?" "You fixed the sink," Liam said. "And you're the grey man, so yes." "Okay, I'm going to make us a breakfast fit for a king, but I need to make a business call first." Harrison didn't have his phone. Sterling had remotely wiped and bricked his company device. He had to use Emily's landline, a relic from the 90s. He dialed Pendergast's private burner number. "Blackwood," Harrison said. "Sir!" Pendergast's voice was hushed. "Where are you?" "Sterling has security teams sweeping the downtown hotels. He's telling the press you're suffering from grief-induced psychosis and are a danger to yourself." "I'm safe. I'm at the safe house," Harrison said, glancing at the peeling wallpaper. "What's the situation at the firm?" "Bad. Sterling called an emergency board meeting for tomorrow at 9 a.m. He's going to vote you out as CEO and seize control. He's claiming you gave away company assets to random strangers, meaning the check you tried to give Emily." "That snake!" Harrison hissed. "Pendergast, I need you to get me a file. The Project Orion merger documents from 5 years ago." "Orion? Sir, that's dead buried. Why?" "Because that was the year Tobias left. Sterling was the one handling the due diligence. I want to see what he buried." Harrison hung up. He turned to Liam. "All right, partner. We have work to do." Harrison Blackwood, a man who once closed a $1 billion deal over lobster in Dubai, spent the next 3 hours in the hallway of the tenement building. He wasn't begging. He was consulting. He saw Mrs. Higgins, the elderly neighbor, crying over a letter on the stairs. "What's wrong, madam?" Harrison asked, adjusting his flannel shirt. "The hospital," Mrs. Higgins sobbed. "They say I owe $8,000 for my hip surgery. I can't pay. They're going to take my pension." Harrison took the letter. He scanned it with predator's eyes. "This billing code is wrong, and they've charged you for an out-of-network anesthesiologist when you were at an in-network facility. That's a violation of the No Surprises Act." He took her phone. "May I?" Harrison spent 20 minutes on the phone with the hospital billing department. He didn't yell. He used the cold, terrifyingly precise language of corporate law. He cited statutes. He threatened a class-action lawsuit. By the time he hung up, the bill was reduced to $400. Mrs. Higgins looked at him like he was a wizard. "How did you—" "I speak shark," Harrison said with a wink. "Now, Mrs. Higgins, about that casserole I smell. By the time Emily came home from her cleaning shift at 2 p.m., she walked into a surreal scene. Harrison was sitting at her tiny kitchen table. On the table were 3 casseroles, a fresh apple pie, and a stack of paperwork. He was on the landline again, aggressively renegotiating a neighbor's credit card interest rate. "Listen to me, Steve," Harrison was saying into the phone. "If you don't drop the APR to 12%, my client will file for Chapter 7 bankruptcy tomorrow, and you get 0. Do the math. Good. Send the confirmation email." He hung up and looked at Emily. "Dinner is served," Harrison said, gesturing to the food. "Mrs. Higgins made the tuna casserole. Mr. Henderson from 2B brought the pie, because I got his eviction notice delayed by 3 months. Emily dropped her bag. "You turned my apartment into a law firm?" "I'm diversifying my portfolio." Harrison smiled, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. He looked tired. "Emily, we need to talk about Sterling and about Tobias." Emily's face hardened. She sent Liam to watch cartoons in the other room. "What about Tobias?" "Pendergast is digging," Harrison said, his voice dropping. I asked myself, why did Tobias really leave? We fought, yes, but he was stubborn. He wouldn't have cut me off completely just over an argument about art school. Someone fed the fire. Someone made sure we never spoke again. Emily went to the kitchen drawer. She pulled out a small silver key. "I wondered when you'd figure it out," she whispered. Harrison stared at the key. "What is that?" "Tobias rented a storage unit in West Seattle the week before he died," Emily said, her voice trembling. "He told me never to go there unless something happened to him. After the accident, I was too scared. I thought maybe he was in trouble with loan sharks. I just wanted to protect Liam." She slid the key across the table. "He told me, if my dad ever stops being a monster, give him this." Harrison picked up the key. It felt hot in his hand. "Pendergast is coming to pick us up," Harrison said. "We're going to the storage unit." The drive to West Seattle was suffocating. The silence inside the black SUV wasn't empty. It was pressurized, heavy with 5 years of unanswered questions. Harrison Blackwood sat in the back seat, clutching the small silver key Emily had given him, as if it were a religious artifact. Beside him, Emily stared out the window at the grey blur of the I-5 highway, her hand resting protectively on her purse, which contained the only photo of Tobias she had left. "Take the Alki exit," Harrison instructed, his voice tight. "The storage facility is near the docks." Pendergast steered the vehicle off the highway, navigating through the industrial district where the air smelled of salt water, diesel, and rust. They pulled up to Safe Harbor Self-Storage, a bleak complex of corrugated metal surrounded by chain-link fences topped with razor wire. It was a place where people stored things they couldn't bear to throw away, but didn't have the space to keep. A graveyard of delayed decisions. The electronic gate groaned open. Pendergast drove slowly down the rows of orange metal doors, finally stopping in front of Unit 304. "I'll stay with the vehicle, sir," Pendergast said, his eyes scanning the perimeter in the rearview mirror. "If Sterling is tracking us, we won't have long." Harrison nodded. He stepped out into the mist. The key felt slippery in his sweating palm. He looked at Emily, who was shivering slightly in her coat. "You've never been inside?" Harrison asked. "No," she whispered. "Tobias made me promise. He said it was dangerous. I thought he meant emotionally dangerous. I thought it was just his failed art, paintings he couldn't bear to burn." Harrison inserted the key into the padlock. It turned with a satisfying click. He grabbed the handle of the roll-up door. "Ready?" Emily nodded. Harrison heaved the metal door upward. It rattled violently. the sound echoing like thunder in the quiet alleyway. Harrison hit the light switch. A single overhead fluorescent bulb flickered to life, buzzing angrily before settling into a harsh, white hum. They both gasped. It wasn't a storage unit. It was a war room disguised as a studio. The space was packed floor to ceiling, but unlike the chaotic mess of a hoarder, there was a terrifying, obsessive order to it. On the left wall, canvases were stacked 10 deep, smelling of turpentine and linseed oil. On the right, metal shelving units overflowed with boxes labeled with dates. But the back wall was something else entirely. It was covered in a collage of newspaper clippings, printed emails, bank statements, and complex diagrams drawn in red marker directly onto the drywall. Red string connected photos of men in suits to photos of offshore bank accounts. "My God," Emily breathed, stepping over the threshold. He wasn't just painting, he was hunting. Harrison walked into the room, his footsteps echoing on the cold concrete. He felt like an intruder in a temple. He approached a solitary easel, standing in the center of the room. A drop cloth covered the canvas. With a trembling hand, Harrison pulled it away. He flinched. The painting was a masterpiece of agony. It depicted a man in a grey suit, Harrison, sitting on a throne made of golden bars. But the gold was melting, dripping down to form a cage around him. The figure's face was twisted in a silent scream. But the eyes were painted with such tender, heart-breaking clarity. They weren't looking at the gold. They were looking at a small bird flying away in the distance, out of reach. The title was scrawled in charcoal at the bottom, "The King in the Gilded Cage." "He didn't hate you," Emily said, her voice breaking as she stood beside him. "He was terrified for you." Harrison couldn't look away from the painted eyes. They were his eyes, but stripped of the arrogance, stripped of the armor. They were the eyes of a man who knew he was trapped, but didn't know how to escape. "He saw me," Harrison whispered. He really saw me. He turned away from the painting, unable to bear the weight of his son's empathy. He moved to the back wall, the wall of evidence. "Project Orion," Harrison read aloud. The words were written in bold red ink at the top of the drywall. He traced the lines connecting the photos. There was a picture of Victor Sterling, a picture of the CFO of the Asian tech giant they had acquired 5 years ago, and a picture of a man Harrison didn't recognize, a rough-looking mechanic with a scar on his chin. "Pendergast!" Harrison shouted, his voice echoing out to the car. "Get in here, now!" Pendergast jogged in, his hand instinctively going to his hip. He stopped dead when he saw the wall. Mother of God. "Look at this," Harrison commanded, pointing to a cluster of documents taped to the wall. "These are bank transfers. Cayman Islands, shell companies, Blue Heron Holdings, Apex Limited." He ripped a document off the wall. It was a printout of an encrypted email chain. Tobias had evidently cracked the encryption or stolen the password. From V. Sterling 2, redacted. Subject, the Orion problem. The audit is coming. If Blackwood sees the real valuation reports, the deal is dead. We need to tank the target stock price before the quarterly review. Initiate the leak about the security flaw. That should drop them by 40%. I'll handle the buy side. Harrison's hands shook so hard the paper rattled. He manufactured a crisis, Harrison snarled. Sterling leaked false information about the tech firm's user data security to crash their stock so we could buy them for pennies on the dollar. It's market manipulation. Fraud. It's a 20-year sentence. "Read the next one," Emily said, pointing to a frantic scribble on a sticky note below the email. It was Tobias's handwriting. August 14th. Found the second ledger. Sterling isn't just manipulating the market. He's skimming the difference. He's stealing from the firm. He's stealing from Dad. Harrison felt a wave of nausea. He had trusted Sterling. He had let Sterling hold the reins while he played the grieving father. All the while, the man was a parasite, feeding on the carcass of the company Harrison had built. But why leave? Harrison asked the empty room, his voice cracking. Why run? Why not bring this to me? We could have crushed him together. Pendergast moved to a filing cabinet in the corner. Sir, I think I found the answer. He pulled out a digital voice recorder. It was old, dusty, taped to the underside of the drawer. Pendergast pressed play. The room filled with the static-laced sound of a hidden recording. Then, two voices cut through the noise. Voice 1. Tobias. I'm going to him, Victor. I have the files. He'll fire you. He'll bury you. Voice 2. Sterling. You really don't know your father, do you, Toby? You think he cares about ethics? He cares about the bottom line. If you show him this, he won't fire me. He'll cover it up, and then he'll resent you for making him liable. Tobias. You're lying. He's hard, but he's not a crook. Sterling. Am I? But let's play a game. You go to him, and I'll release the documents I have. Documents that show your father signed off on the initial strategy. I forged his signature, of course. But who will the feds believe? The cutthroat CEO known for aggressive takeovers, or the loyal deputy? You go to the police, your father goes to prison. For life. There was a long, agonizing silence on the tape. Sterling. Or, you disappear. You walk away. You let me finish the deal. Your father gets his merger, the stock goes up. Everyone wins. And you get to live your little bohemian life, safe in the knowledge that you kept Daddy out of jail. Click. The tape ended. Harrison fell to his knees. The concrete floor rushed up to meet him. He hadn't been abandoned. He had been saved. Tobias had accepted exile, poverty, and estrangement to protect Harrison from a crime he didn't even commit. He had allowed Harrison to call him a failure, a disappointment, a disgrace, all to shield his father from a frame job. He saved me, Harrison sobbed, the sound raw and ugly, tearing from his throat. He saved me, and I spat in his face. I threw him out. Emily was crying, too, silent tears streaming down her cheeks. She knelt beside Harrison. He never told me, she whispered. He just said he had to leave the family business to save his soul. I didn't know he meant he was saving yours. Harrison slammed his fist into the ground, bruising his knuckles. And the accident? The crash? Pendergast walked over to the wall again. He pointed to the picture of the mechanic with the scar. Sir, look at the date on this news clipping. Tobias saved. Harrison looked. It was an obituary. Michael R. Halloway, 44, found dead of apparent overdose. The date was 2 weeks after Tobias died. I remember the police report, Pendergast said, his voice dropping to a growl. They said the brake lines on Tobias's car were corroded, but Tobias was meticulous. You saw the sink. You saw the apartment. He fixed everything. Harrison stood up. The grief was still there, a hollow ache in his chest, but it was being rapidly filled by a cold, white-hot fury. It was the kind of rage that toppled empires. Sterling realized Tobias was still a threat, Harrison said, his voice deadly calm. Tobias was keeping the evidence. He probably threatened to come forward if Sterling ever hurt me or the company again. So Sterling cut the brake lines, and then cleaned up the loose end by killing the mechanic, Pendergast finished. Harrison walked over to the filing cabinet and grabbed the thick manila envelope labeled Originals. We have everything, Harrison said. The emails, the recording, the forged signatures. We have enough to put Sterling away for 1,000 years. But we have a problem, sir, Pendergast said, checking his watch. The board meeting is in 12 hours. Sterling is going to seize control of the company. Once he's CEO, he'll have access to the archives. He'll scrub the servers. He'll bury the digital trail. We need to stop that vote. We can't just walk in, Emily said, wiping her eyes. You said there's security. They think you're crazy. Sterling has spun the narrative. Harrison looked at the portrait of himself, the king in the gilded cage. He reached out and touched the painted face of the man he used to be. They think I'm crazy, Harrison said softly. They think I'm weak. They think I'm the man in the cage. He turned to look at Emily and Pendergast. His eyes were dry now. They were hard as diamonds. Sterling expects Harrison Blackwood, the billionaire. He expects a lawsuit. He expects a shouting match at the front gate. Harrison began to pace the small room, the old energy returning, but sharper this time. He doesn't expect the father. He doesn't expect the waitress. And he certainly doesn't expect the ghost of Tobias Blackwood. Harrison grabbed a marker from the table and walked to the wall. He drew a circle around the date of the board meeting. Emily, Harrison said, you still have friends in the catering staff at the tower, don't you? Yes, she said, confused. Sarah runs the shift for the executive floor. Good. Call her. Tell her you need a shift. Tell her you're bringing a helper. A helper? Emily asked. Harrison looked down at his flannel shirt and jeans. He looked at his rough hands, stained with grease from the sink repair. I'm going to serve coffee, Harrison said with a dark smile. I'm going to serve coffee to the board of directors while they vote on my demise. That's insane, Pendergast said. If they recognize you. They won't, Harrison said, because for 20 years I never looked the service staff in the eye. I treated them like furniture. The board is the same. They won't see a person. They'll see a uniform. They'll see a pitcher of water. He held up the envelope of evidence. We're going to walk right into the lion's den, Pendergast, and when Sterling stands up to take his crown, I'm going to serve him his check. Harrison walked to the door of the storage unit. He looked back one last time at the studio, the sanctuary where his son had lived, loved and died, protecting him. I can't bring you back, Toby, Harrison whispered to the empty air. But I can finish your work. He hit the light switch. Darkness swallowed the room, but the fire in Harrison's eyes remained. Let's go, Harrison commanded. We have a company to steal back. The metal door rattled shut, sealing the tomb of the past. As they walked back to the SUV, the rain began to fall again. But Harrison didn't feel the cold. He felt only the heat of the coming storm. The billionaire was dead. The father had just woken up. Harrison Blackwood has discovered the shattering truth. His son wasn't a prodigal failure. He was a silent hero who died protecting his father from a viper in the nest. Now, armed with the evidence of murder and fraud, the homeless billionaire and the waitress are about to stage the most hostile takeover in history. But Victor Sterling is waiting, and he has one final card to play, one that involves little Liam. Can Harrison infiltrate his own company disguised as the help? And what will happen when the killer realizes the dead man's wife is in the room? You do not want to miss the explosive finale. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you're the first to see Harrison unleash hell. Comment, "Justice for Tobias," if you're ready for Sterling to pay.